Hi and welcome into Burner, where today we look at the story that claims that this little tart changed history. It broke up one of the most powerful alliances in Europe and caused a schism in the Catholic Church, or so they say. Others even say that years later it travelled overseas and became the staple for a global empire. Are any of these bold claims true? We'll see, but what we can already tell you is that this is the story of the Maid of Honour tart. In Richmond, today a South London borough, local legend has it that one fateful day, King Henry VIII was roaming the halls of his palace in Richmond, looking for Catherine of Aragon, his wife and queen at the time, when he came across some tarts being eaten by Queen Catherine's ladies-in-waiting. Among these was the lovely Anne Boleyn, who caught his eye over her off-duty treat. Henry was apparently so enamored with the tarts that he kept the recipe a secret by ordering it locked in an iron box in the palace. Like with all these stories, there is more than one version. A less salacious but more mysterious version of the story is that Henry found the recipe in the palace, like some anonymous post-it left on the fridge. He then asked one of the Queen's maids of honour to make them. And who was tasked with the duties in the kitchen? You've guessed it, Anne Boleyn. He was apparently so enamored with the tart that he named it after her, Maid of Honour. There are some other versions of the story around, like one where the maid who knew the recipe was kept locked in the dungeons of the palace, so only he and his court could enjoy them. Are any of these stories true? Well, it's now time for the historian's sacred duty of ruining the fun. The last story, the one where the maid is kept locked up like some culinary man in the iron mask, is quite hard to believe for us. Even though Henry himself preferred Hampton Court, Richmond was still a key centre in the royal operation run by the Tudors. Henry's only son, with Queen Catherine, drew his first and sadly last breaths here. Richmond Palace was the place where Henry placed family members that didn't fit in his day-to-day life, like the princesses Mary and Elizabeth and later Anne of Cleves after their divorce. During the reign of Elizabeth I, it even became her favourite residence. In short, we think someone would have noticed. The story that Anne Boleyn was appointed main pastry chef after the discovery of a mysterious recipe also feels a bit incredulous to us, for the main reason that cooking in the 16th century was not the genteel middle-class hobby it is today. Especially in palace kitchens, it was hard labour in and around wood fires. We don't really see a queen's lady-in-waiting in this setting. One thing that does link maids of honour with the Palace of Richmond is that in 1724 a row of terraced houses was built nearby to house the ladies-in-waiting of Caroline Ansbach, then the Princess of Wales. These houses were collectively called the Maids of Honour Row. We don't know how much of a coincidence this naming was, but just over 2 decades later, in 1750, a baker, also in Richmond, started selling Maid of Honour tarts, supposedly allowing people outside the palace walls to taste these sweets for the first time. The business changed hands a few times over the centuries, but the original Maids of Honour, a popular tea room still standing in Richmond to this day, sells Maid of Honour tarts, which are apparently still baked according to that Tudor recipe of old. The story repeated on the menu of the Maids of Honour is the more romantic first iteration, which we will admit we can't disprove, so it could be true. Just know that for a baker opening a new business, enshrouding his specialty with some royal mystery would have been a very shrewd business move. So assuming that Henry VIII did get smitten as fair Lady Anne was wiping the last sweetened cheese curds off her mouth, what were these tarts made of? Now, there are ample modern recipes available, but the finished product of these doesn't really resemble the ones we got from Richmond. So don't get angry if this is not the way you make these tarts. It's very fair to say that the recipe has undergone some evolution, but the Richmond tea room claims to be the closest to the original, so that's the one we are gunning for. The exact recipe is a closely guarded family secret, because of course it is. It's a nice little tart, but we wouldn't say it warrants intercontinental travel, so we are going to try and crack the code through a little bit of reverse engineering. The inside of the tart is cheese curds, comparable to fresh ricotta, which makes this a bit of a tiny cheesecake. Flavor-wise, it's sweet with an undertone of savouriness, reminding us of a gentle custard. This seems very on brand for Henry VIII, as he was a big fan of desserts, especially custard-based ones. The 1526 Eltham Ordinances have detailed lists of the food which everyone at court was entitled to, and we can see that even on fast days, custards and tarts would still be on the menu. During the Lent of 1541, a shortage of fish prompted Henry to dispense with the law of abstinence from white meat and declare that his subjects may eat milk, eggs, butter, cheese and the like. Sometimes it's convenient to have declared yourself head of the church. We don't think we'll discover more by just looking and tasting, regardless of how nice the latter might be. Luckily, we have sources to help us shed light on things. Our best one is from 100 years after Henry VIII, but a good 90 years before Maid of Honour tarts were sold in Richmond. A 1665 cookbook by Robert May called The Accomplished Cook contains a recipe for something called to make a dish of curds, which reads: take some very tender curds, wring whey from them very well, cheese curds with the whey removed, good start. Then put to them 2 raw eggs, currants, sweet butter, rose water, cinnamon, sugar, and mingle all together. Eggs, butter, cinnamon, and sugar. This is all looking very promising. Oh wait, this recipe has instructions for a crust, and it's not puff pastry. Oh fiddlesticks, ruined. Back to the drawing board. Sorry, let me check here. Bake it either in this or in puff paste. Never mind, we're good. Being baked, ice it with rose water, sugar and butter. A small extra glaze? Lovely. Let's make this. Now the recipe says we can use puff pastry, and if you do, we recommend using the La Varenne recipe we made in our puff pastry video. We're going to have a stab at making the included short crust dough, as it is weirdly similar to a modern short crust recipe. Take about 200 grams of flour and 100 grams of butter and rub the butter into the flour until you get this rough crumb structure. Then add egg yolk, 2 teaspoons of sugar and a small dash of rose water. We left out the saffron because it's decadent. Now add cold water until everything comes together. Once ready, set this aside, ideally somewhere cold and sealed. Now onto the filling. We need to make cheese curds, which we're doing with some whole milk and vinegar, and squeezing out most of the whey. Now the recipe tells us to simply mix this with the other ingredients, but cinnamon, that's going to stick between the teeth, and there's no long soaking step in this recipe, which would allow for infusion. So we're going to ground a bit up and put this into our curds along with the butter and eggs. Put this on the lightest heat you can get. This can even be over a candle. We only want to melt the butter. You should be able to still touch the bottom of the pan. Once the butter has melted, add in some sugar and rose water. The recipe doesn't tell us how much butter and sugar to use, but these were very expensive back then, so we're going very light on them. Feel free to increase these amounts if you want a sweeter tart. Currants? Yes, you can add them, but we're going to say that they're optional. We didn't spot them in Richmond, so we're not adding them to these. Is it very runny? Yes, but don't worry, this is going to reduce a lot in the oven. Now take your dough, be it puff or short, and put it in a muffin tin or these little molds. While you do this, preheat your oven to as high as it can go. Yes, that high. The Richmond tarts show clear darkening in their tops. You get this with hot ovens. While our oven gets warm, we're going to spoon some curdy custard into our shapes. Make sure there's enough space left at the top because these will puff up. We don't recommend much more than a teaspoon when using small shapes like this. Put in the oven for 10 to 15 minutes. Keep an eye on them. When the tops start to brown, they're good. When you take them out, you'll see they've poofed up a lot. They will collapse a bit, but ours never went as low as the Richmond ones. We did notice how more liquid you put in, the further they collapse, so feel free to maybe add some milk if you want to. So when you sink your teeth in these, you might be reminded of a different tart, especially if you left out the currants. It's very reminiscent of a similar, small, much more famous tart. We can't put our finger on it. Maybe somebody said it in the Maid of Honour reviews. Oh yes, they are very similar, weirdly similar now that you mention it. Like the Maid of Honour tart, the Pastel de Nata also has a storied past. Portugal has a rich tradition of convent sweets, made by nuns and friars who lived in convents and monasteries. Egg white was used to starch habits, which left a lot of yolks to dispose of. The Portuguese also had significant access to sugarcane, so perhaps it wasn't surprising that the men and women of the cloth were also some of the oldest pâtissiers of the country, and one of the things they seemed to have been keen on was the Pastel de Nata. In fact, a couple of old notebooks from these nuns, one dating back to the 1700s, contained recipes for baked cream tarts. We don't exactly know who made the first Pastel de Nata, but a convent that is often credited for this is the famous Hieronymus monastery of Boleyn, near Lisbon, which kept their recipe a secret. Listing all these features of the Pastel de Nata is making these similarities with the Maid of Honour tarts seem weirdly uncanny. Still sold by a local bakery which remains popular to this day? Baked from a closely guarded secret recipe? On the outskirts of a capital city? Boleyn was commercialized due to Portugal dissolving its monasteries. And who else do we know who liked to dissolve himself a monastery? 2 tarts? 2 maritime empires? Did Catherine of Aragon, homesick for Iberian reminders of the dinner table, bring the Portuguese tart to the English kitchen, creating an inn for Anne Boleyn with the king in the process? Would the English schism not have happened? Would Elizabeth I not have been born? Then the Armada would not have been defeated. Might English settlers not have settled in North America? The Dutch Republic would never have survived, surely. The settlement of the Americas would have gone very differently. Did this little tart cause the formation of the United States of America? Probably not. Before we move on, we want to ask you to, if you can, please press subscribe, or if you're already a subscriber, hit the like button. We're aiming to get this channel monetized, and for that we need people to watch it. You are already helping, but you can help a little bit more by pressing those buttons. Thank you very much. Now let's get back to explaining why a tart did not cause the formation of the United States. The concept of a sweet tart with milk and egg filling was also not new to the English. The 1390 Forme of Cury, one of the oldest cookbooks from England, already has a recipe for darioles, which was made by mixing cream with eggs, sugar, saffron and salt, then baking it in a 2-inch pastry crust, long before Henry VIII ever laid eyes on a maid of honour. Wait! In that case, the Portuguese must have gotten it from England. Portugal and England are each other's oldest allies. Some believe it was Catherine de Braganza, Queen of Charles II, who brought them with her when she returned to Portugal after his death. The lady is already credited with bringing tea to England. Only makes sense that she brings something back. Yes, it all makes sense. That would make the Pastel de Nata English. One of the most popular desserts in the world is from England, with its spread slightly assisted by its good Portuguese friends. Put that in your pipe and smoke it, France. Ah yes, Britannia rules the waves. Of custard. We've always known that Pastel de Nata, or Pastel de Nata as they are known now, were massively superior to any pain au chocolat. Not so fast, John Bull. Before you go off declaring that England is the Queen of Tarts, this theory is very easy to disprove. In 1565, Infanta Maria of Portugal married Duke Alessandro Farnese of Parma and brought with her a cookbook, specifically the oldest known Portuguese collection of recipes. Among these was a recipe for a pastel de nata, or milk tart, which had a filling made of thickened milk and eggs baked in a crust. The pastel de nata is widely thought to be the precursor of the Pastel de Nata, and Infanta Maria was born 2 years after Anne Boleyn's death, but well before Catherine of Braganza ever left for England. But maybe it came from England to Portugal during the very narrow period between Henry VIII and the writing of Infanta Maria's cookbook? Not likely, if we're honest, and quite irrelevant. You see, the oldest written record of a baked custard we could find wasn't English or Portuguese, but from ancient Rome, De Coquinaria, also commonly referred to as the Apicius book, contained a recipe for tiropatinam, a custard made of milk and eggs sweetened with honey, baked in an oven and served with a sprinkle of pepper. It's missing a pastry crust, but despite its age, the tiropatinam bears more than a passing resemblance to the darioles in the Forme of Cury. Also in Italy there was a recipe for di riola, captured in the 15th century Libre de Arte Coquinaria, which instructed cooks to blind bake a crust with excess flour as its weight, then bake a filling of egg yolks, milk, sugar and cinnamon in it. In 1553, Sabina Welserin of Germany wrote a book known to us today as Das Kookboek der Sabina Welserin, a mere 6 years after the death of Henry VIII. Her family, the Welser, was a prominent merchant family and may have enabled her to be more savvy to food trends than the average author. But even then, the culture of baked goods in Germany was ingrained enough for Sabina to include more than 5 recipes for various egg, milk and cream tarts. The 1593 Kookboek from Flemish physician Carolus Battus contains a recipe for fine tarts, requiring a truly impressive number of eggs. It might be more accurate to say that there was a shared culinary history in Europe as a whole, where people with eggs and milk thought it would be a good idea to bake them into crusts. Now let's finally make Portuguese Pastel de Nata. As we said before, a lot of Portugal's sweets have their origins in monastic orders, and although the pastéis from the famous Hieronymites recipe might still be a secret, another recipe, also from just before the dissolution of the monasteries in Portugal, did make it out in public. This recipe is by Bernardino de Conceição, and it's from the same period as the Boleyn one. Truth be told, this is a very rudimentary recipe which we got from an offline website, so this isn't exactly what historians call a high-quality source. It does have some gaps, which we are going to fill with an even older recipe, purportedly from the convent of Evora. We only got this one from a screenshot on a blog, so it's an even lower quality source, which is why we're only using it as a guide for ratios. But we do like the one by Bernardina de Conceição. Why? It's in metric. First, we need to boil 3 liters of milk. Good old Bernardina does this to get the cream from that milk. Very rustic. We're going to skip this step and just get cream. 3 liters would yield just under 1 liter of single cream, so that's what we are using. Also, we're not cooking for an entire convent here, so we're quartering everything. 250 milliliters of cream. The use of cream instead of milk might seem excessive, but modern recipes use milk with butter, which is essentially reintroducing the cream fats to milk. The much too long texts accompanying present-day recipes often ask the question, why are they called de nata, even though they're made with milk? Well, here's your answer. Originally, they were made with cream. Then we are to add to this cream the eggs. We don't know how many though. The good sister must have forgotten to write that down. The Evora recipe, however, does tell us to use 15 yolks. Divided by 4 would give us roughly 3 egg yolks. That seems like a reasonable amount. We are then to add a bit of orange blossom water and some crushed cinnamon. So far so good. Next up is the sugar, and this recipe uses a lot. Almost a 1-to-1 ratio with the cream, so here that will be 250 grams. Our recipe tells us to put it in molds, but the Evora recipe specifies that it should be puff pastry. We are getting out some lovely Lavarin puff pastry and counting our little molds while our custard thickens. Once ready, pour in your custard and put the tarts in the oven. Again at high heat. Like with our Maids of Honour, we are looking for that signature caramelized look at the top. Once ready, dig in. They are nice, but we've eaten better. These days, pastéis are made with caramelized syrup, which has aromatics infused, and butter instead of cream. Our old-style pastéis don't have that signature smooth layer at the top, which we think is due to the lack of flour in the custard. Oddly, it makes these look a lot more like the Richmond Maid of Honour tarts. The addition of flour to the custard, or the infusion of aromatics in a syrup, might have been the secrets kept by the monks of Boleyn. Guess we'll never know. If you want them even better, grind up some cinnamon to pour over top. And this concludes our tale of 2 tarts. Thank you very much for watching.